Hello, this is the Philosophical Rebellion Substack. There have been a few important developments from the United States State Department regarding the Israel-Hamas conflict. They just released something called the National Security Memorandum, which assessed whether or not Israel has violated any U.S. or international laws throughout the conflict, especially those that would trigger a pause in the United States aid to Israel. That was an assessment pushed for by many Democratic members of Congress, and the State Department came out and said that it is reasonable to conclude that United States weaponry had been used in the violation of international law, also confirming that Israel had in fact violated international law. But the State Department fell short of saying that a pause in United States aid to Israel would be triggered based on those international law violations, claiming to have referred those instances to the Israeli government so that the Israeli government could investigate itself and hold itself accountable for war crimes. So in one aspect, the State Department did conclude that the Israeli government has violated international law in some instances of its bombing campaign throughout Gaza. But the State Department did not assess that the Israeli government is blocking humanitarian aid from reaching Gaza, even though a total siege is stated Israeli policy, with an Israeli minister declaring in October that they were going to cut off food, water, medicine, and electricity to all civilians in Gaza. So even though that has been the official stated policy of the Israeli government, a total siege, and Secretary Blinken recognized that 100% of the population of Gaza is facing severe acute food insecurity, with the UN and World Food Program warning of a mass famine, and Human Rights Watch declaring that the Israeli government is using starvation as a method of warfare in the Gaza Strip, the State Department still refuses to acknowledge the obvious reality that the Israeli government is trying to starve the population of Gaza. And that is a clear violation of the Foreign Assistance Act. That law says that the United States government is prohibited from funding any foreign government engaged in gross violations of human rights. So again, this new National Security Memorandum from the State Department is another way to skirt the Leahy laws. And those assessments are really important because if you look at the precision targeting of people like Hind Rajab, or the paramedics that went to save her, or the controlled demolitions of schools, or the dropping of massive unguided bombs into residential locations, or the targeting of one Hamas official in a refugee camp containing hundreds of civilians, or the massive graveyard of people found at a hospital bound and buried in the rubble, each one of those constitutes a gross violation of human rights, which would automatically trigger the Leahy Law enforcement, thereby prohibiting the American government from funding the Israeli government. So you have the Israeli government announcing a siege on a population in Gaza now experiencing a famine, with Anthony Blinken even acknowledging the reality of the food crisis in Gaza. So this one should be incredibly easy to answer. So I think it is vital for the State Department to answer the question on whether or not the government enacting a siege on a population experiencing a famine is responsible for that famine. Because cutting off United States humanitarian aid before it reaches its destination is a violation of the Foreign Assistance Act, which would automatically trigger enforcement of the Leahy Law, meaning the United States government is prohibited from funding any government cutting off United States-based humanitarian aid assistance from reaching its destination, which Israel is doing in Gaza, disqualifying Israel from receiving United States aid, if the Israeli government is in fact doing what their official policy says. That is absolutely vital for Anthony Blinken to reach a conclusion on. If the population of Gaza is in need of being protected from the crime of genocide, then the United States has obligations under international law to do what we can to prevent that crime from being committed, including ending the diplomatic and financial relationships between us and the country committing that genocide. So to bring all of this together for a second, in the National Security Memorandum that the Secretary of State just released, They found that the Israeli government is in violation of international law. But since they referred those crimes to the Israeli government to hold the Israeli government accountable, the Secretary of State said that those violations of international law don't really matter and we're going to keep funding them regardless. Then said since some humanitarian aid is getting into Gaza, they could not conclude that the Israeli government was blocking any aid. So, in the same ways that the Israeli government has been exempted from the Lehi law vetting process in the past, that same thing is happening right now. So despite the Israeli government being in violation of the Lehi laws, and current United States law prohibits our government from funding the government of Israel, our government is telling us that that law doesn't matter and it does not apply to the Israeli government. So making the 4 explicit assessments that I recommended would be almost impossible to lie about, and each assessment on its own would be able to trigger enforcement of the Lehi law. But as we've just seen in the National Security Memorandum, that's not all that we need to do. The United States also needs to stop having the Israeli government be their own judge and jury. They have already proven themselves incapable of that. So absolutely no more war crimes can be referred to the Israeli government to hold themselves accountable. We need the United States government to abide by the Lehi laws and hold the Israeli government accountable. So we need to end the special rules in the State Department for the Israeli government when it comes to the Lehi law vetting process. Because when it comes to human rights conditions on the aid that we send foreign governments, absolutely no foreign government should be exempted from those laws.